There is an animal living in our oceans right now that should not be as remarkable as it is. By every conventional measure of biology, it should be slow, simple, and unremarkable. It has no skeleton, no protective shell, no pack to rely on, no parent to teach it anything. And yet, what this creature does on a daily basis quietly dismantles almost every assumption we have ever made about what intelligence looks like, where it comes from, and what it even means to have a mind. We are talking, of course, about the octopus. And once you understand what is actually happening inside that soft, ink-filled body, you will never look at the ocean the same way again. Let us start with a story, because this particular animal has a habit of making headlines in the most unexpected ways. In 2016, staff at a marine aquarium in New Zealand arrived to work one morning and noticed something immediately wrong. One of their residents, a common octopus who had been living comfortably in his tank for quite some time, was simply gone. No shattered glass, no sign of struggle, just an empty enclosure and a faint trail of moisture on the floor that told the whole story. This animal, known to the staff as Inky, had located a small gap near the top of his tank lid, barely large enough to seem worth attempting, compressed his entire boneless body through it, crossed the open floor of the aquarium room, located a drainage pipe that measured roughly 50 meters in total length, and used it as an escape route directly back to the open ocean. Think about what that actually required. Not just the physical ability to compress through a gap, but the awareness that the gap existed and could be used. The motivation to act on that awareness. The capacity to navigate an unfamiliar space in darkness. The persistence to travel the full length of that pipe. This was not instinct. Instinct does not plan. Instinct does not problem solve. What Inky did that night was something much closer to what we would call deliberate intentional action, and it forces us to ask a genuinely uncomfortable question. How does a creature without bones, without a centralized brain as we understand it, and without any social structure to learn from, end up operating at this level? The answer begins somewhere you might not expect. Inside the circulatory system. An octopus runs on 3 hearts. 2 of them are dedicated entirely to pushing blood through the gills, where oxygen is extracted from the water. The 3rd, larger heart handles the rest of the body, driving oxygenated blood to the arms, organs, and crucially, the brain. This triple pump architecture is not simply an interesting biological footnote. It is the foundational infrastructure that makes everything else possible. During Inky's 50-meter crawl across that floor and through that drain pipe, the physical demands on his body were extreme. The friction, the muscular effort required to drag a soft body across dry surfaces, the sustained cognitive alertness needed to keep moving in the right direction through total darkness. A single heart operating under that kind of sustained load would have failed. The oxygen debt would have accumulated faster than it could be repaid, and the animal would have lost consciousness long before reaching the pipe. 3 hearts made it survivable. Here is the paradox buried inside that impressive system, though. When an octopus switches from crawling to active swimming, the main systemic heart actually stops beating entirely. Swimming, which looks effortless from the outside, creates enough physiological disruption that the central pump shuts down temporarily. This is why octopuses, despite being capable swimmers, will often choose to walk along the seafloor on the tips of their arms rather than swim freely through open water. The walking is energetically cheaper. The cardiovascular cost of sustained swimming is simply too high, so this animal, with a more complex heart than you have, still finds open water travel exhausting enough to avoid it whenever possible. Evolution is full of trade-offs, and the octopus carries its own set of them with remarkable efficiency. Now, let us talk about what happens when you give an octopus a problem to solve. In laboratory settings, researchers have placed octopuses in front of sealed glass jars containing food. The jars were closed with standard screw-top lids. No prior training was given. No reward system was set up to guide the animal toward a solution. The octopus simply encountered the jar, investigated it with its arms, and within a remarkably short period of time had figured out the rotational mechanics of the lid. 8 arms wrapped around the jar, suction cups pressing firmly against the glass with small, rhythmic popping sounds as they engaged and repositioned, and then the animal performed a slow, controlled, counterclockwise rotation until the lid gave way. The food was retrieved. The problem was solved. What makes this genuinely striking is not just that the octopus succeeded. It is the method. The animal was not smashing the jar. It was not trying random approaches until something worked. It was applying precisely the right kind of force in precisely the right direction. That requires a mechanical model of the object, an understanding of what kind of action will produce the desired result. We once believed that level of object manipulation was the exclusive domain of primates. The octopus has quietly proven that assumption wrong. The curiosity does not stop at controlled laboratory tasks either. In large public aquariums around the world, maintenance teams have occasionally been baffled by lights burning out at an unusual rate, particularly during overnight hours when the building is closed. Investigation revealed a consistent culprit. Octopuses had learned that directing a powerful jet of water at the light fixtures above their tanks caused the bulbs to shatter. The bright overhead lighting, apparently distressing to these animals, would go dark with a satisfying crack. The octopus had identified a cause and effect relationship, developed a repeatable technique to exploit it, and was actively modifying its own environment to increase its comfort. That is tool use of a kind. It is environmental engineering, and it was happening without anyone teaching it, without any other octopus demonstrating the behavior. The animal worked it out alone. Perhaps the most visually dramatic expression of octopus intelligence is what the mimic octopus does when it encounters a threat. This species, found primarily in the shallow tropical waters of Southeast Asia, does not simply change color or flatten itself against the sand. It actively impersonates other animals. When threatened by a particular predator, the mimic octopus will rearrange its body posture, alter its movement pattern, and adjust its coloration to resemble a completely different species entirely. It has been documented imitating flatfish by pulling its arms together and rippling them along the seafloor in the distinctive undulating glide of a bottom-dwelling fish. It has been observed simulating lionfish by spreading 2 arms wide and moving them in the slow, pulsing rhythm of those venomous spines. The selection of which animal to impersonate appears to be context-dependent, matching the mimicry to the specific predator present. This requires the octopus to hold a mental library of other species, their appearances, their movement signatures, and the threat level they represent to different predators. Retrieving the correct entry from that library and performing it in real time is a cognitive operation of significant complexity. But the behavior that perhaps most clearly demonstrates forward thinking, the ability to sacrifice present comfort for future benefit, involves something as ordinary as a coconut shell. In the shallow waters off the coast of Indonesia, researchers observed octopuses collecting discarded coconut shell halves from the seafloor, carrying them awkward distances across the sand, and storing them for later use as portable shelters. The carrying process was genuinely laborious. The animal had to use 6 of its arms to grip the shells while attempting to move on only 2. An ungainly, slow, and exposed way to travel that made it significantly more vulnerable to attack than it would have been otherwise. There was no immediate benefit to this behavior. The octopus was making itself worse off in the present, accepting real risk in order to have access to a resource it might need later. When a predator eventually appeared, the animal retreated into the shells and pulled the 2 halves together around itself, like closing a door. The temporary vulnerability had been worth it. This is not reflex. This is not conditioning. This is future-oriented planning. The deliberate acceptance of a present cost based on a calculated expectation of a future situation. Scientists refer to this capacity as foresight, and it is extraordinarily rare in the animal kingdom. So where does all of this come from? How does a solitary, short-lived, boneless animal end up operating with this kind of cognitive sophistication? The answer requires us to completely abandon the way we typically think about brains. An octopus possesses approximately 500 million neurons, which places it in genuinely impressive territory compared to most invertebrates. But the number alone is not what makes the system remarkable. What makes it remarkable is how those neurons are distributed. Roughly 2/3 of them do not live in the central brain at all. They are spread throughout the 8 arms, forming dense clusters of nervous tissue at regular intervals along each limb. Each arm is not simply a tool being controlled by a central processor. Each arm is, in a meaningful sense, a processor of its own. When an arm reaches into a dark crevice in search of prey, it does not send a request to the central brain asking for instructions. It feels what is there, analyzes the chemical signals, assesses the texture and movement, and decides how to respond, all locally, all independently. The central brain is freed up to manage higher-level concerns like navigation, threat assessment, and memory, while the arms handle the intricate physical work autonomously. This is a genuinely alien model of cognition. It is not hierarchy. It is a federation. 9 decision-making centers operating in loose coordination, each capable of sophisticated independent action. The arms are not merely mechanical either. Each of the roughly 2,000 suction cups distributed along those 8 limbs is equipped with both tactile receptors and chemoreceptors. They feel surfaces with extraordinary sensitivity and simultaneously taste what they are touching. The chemical information gathered from a single touch tells the animal about the composition, identity, and edibility of whatever it has contacted. In complete darkness, without any visual input at all, an octopus can navigate an entire environment, distinguish between species, and locate specific prey entirely through the chemical landscape read by its arms. Imagine being able to identify everything in a room purely by touching it briefly with your fingertips and instantly knowing its chemical makeup. That is the sensory reality these animals inhabit every moment. The eyes deserve their own section of this conversation because they represent one of the more quietly remarkable examples of engineering in the entire animal kingdom. The structure of the octopus eye is broadly similar in design to the human eye, a camera-type arrangement with a lens focusing light onto a layer of receptors at the back. But the execution differs in a critical way. In the human eye, the optic nerve passes through the retina from the front, creating a physical gap in the receptor layer, a small region where no light can be detected. This is the blind spot. Every human being has one in each eye. The brain compensates by filling in the gap with guessed information, which works well enough in practice, but represents a fundamental design flaw. The octopus retina is wired the opposite way. The nerve connects from behind the receptors, leaving the entire light-sensitive surface intact and uninterrupted. The result is a complete, gap-free field of vision, with no blank patches requiring compensation. For an animal that survives by detecting the slightest movements of predators in turbid water, that continuous visual surface is not a luxury. It is a survival asset. The octopus eye can also detect polarized light, a form of light information that human eyes are entirely blind to. Polarized light patterns are produced by the reflective surfaces of many marine animals, including transparent or semi-transparent creatures like jellyfish that would be nearly invisible to conventional vision. The octopus sees them clearly. What appears to us as open, empty water is, to an octopus, populated with visible chemical and optical signatures of hidden life. And then there is the skin itself. Octopus skin contains the same light-sensitive proteins found in the retina of the eye. These proteins, called opsins, allow the skin to respond directly to light without any input from the central visual system. The skin, in other words, can sense light independently. It does not form images the way an eye does, but it gathers information about brightness, contrast, and wavelength across the entire body surface simultaneously. This feeds directly into the chromatophore system, the network of pigment cells responsible for color change, allowing the animal to adjust its camouflage in real time based on local light conditions detected at the skin itself, without waiting for a signal from the brain. The octopus does not just change color. It reads its environment through its skin and responds to it directly, turning its entire body into a distributed sensory and display system simultaneously. This brings us to the deepest and most philosophically interesting question surrounding this animal. What does consciousness actually mean if intelligence can be structured like this? If each arm thinks independently, if the skin sees and responds without consulting the brain, if 9 semi-autonomous processing centers are constantly running in parallel, is this one individual having one experience? Or is it something more fractured and more fascinating than that? We do not yet have the tools to answer that question with confidence. But the fact that we are asking it at all is significant. The octopus did not arrive at these capabilities through the path that produced human intelligence. The two lineages diverged more than 600 million years ago. Our last shared ancestor was something like a flat, blind, extremely simple worm with no brain to speak of. Everything that looks like intelligence in an octopus evolved independently, from scratch, along an entirely separate trajectory. This is called convergent evolution, and it is one of the most powerful arguments nature has ever made. It demonstrates that complex cognition is not a single invention that got passed down through one lineage. It is a solution that evolution arrived at more than once, through completely different routes, in response to completely different pressures. The pressure that shaped octopus intelligence was not social complexity. It was ecological complexity. When octopuses abandoned the protective shell that their ancestors carried, they became simultaneously more mobile and more vulnerable. A soft body in a reef environment full of predators is a liability that has to be compensated for. The compensation came in the form of cognitive flexibility. The ability to hide, to plan, to manipulate objects, to impersonate other animals, to remember the layout of a territory, to invent solutions to novel problems. Intelligence became the armor that replaced the shell. And unlike a shell, it grew more sophisticated with every generation, because the reef never stopped generating new challenges. What this ultimately means is that our planet already hosts multiple forms of intelligence that developed in complete isolation from one another. We are not alone on this world in the way we sometimes imagine. We share it with minds that work in ways radically different from our own, that experience reality through chemical gradients and polarized light and decentralized neural networks, that plan for futures they cannot see and impersonate creatures they have never been taught to recognize. Every time a coral reef bleaches and dies, every time pollution renders another stretch of coastline uninhabitable, we are not simply losing a habitat. We are losing one of the environments that produced and continues to sustain a form of mind that evolution spent hundreds of millions of years building. That is not a small thing. That is an irreversible loss of something that cannot be recreated. The octopus does not know it is remarkable. It is simply doing what it has always done, solving problems, exploring its world, turning off lights that bother it, carrying shells across the seafloor for reasons it understands, and we are only beginning to. But every time we take the time to actually look at what this animal is doing and understand how it works, we come away with a slightly more honest picture of what life is, what minds are, and how little we actually know about either. So the next time you find yourself standing at the edge of the ocean, looking out at what appears to be a featureless expanse of water, remember what is happening beneath it. Remember the federal nervous systems making 9 simultaneous decisions. Remember the skin that reads light without eyes. Remember the arms that taste in the dark. Remember the animal that escaped through a drainage pipe because it saw a gap and understood what a gap meant. The world is full of intelligence we have not yet learned to recognize. The octopus has been waiting patiently for us to catch up. If this kind of deep dive into the natural world is something you want more of, subscribe to the channel. There is a great deal more where this came from, and you will not want to miss other videos.